Hello everyone, Nick the DM here with a new type of video for the channel, a book series review. As anyone who has seen my videos before can probably tell, either from the channel name or the video topics, I focus on Dungeons & Dragons content. And another thing most D&D nerds have in common is enjoying a good book. And wouldn't you know it, Dungeons & Dragons has a few hundred of them. So I decided to work my way through the Forgotten Realms reading list. Initially, I had planned on making a tier list of each series once I finished the Forgotten Realms, and then I realized that was a lot of work for one video, and I also realized that I enjoy talking about the books, or ranting, depending on how good or bad they are. So in addition to making a tier list once I catch up on the novels, I have decided to make a more detailed review video for each series or standalone novel. So that is what I'm doing now. I will try my best not to mention too many spoilers. At bare minimum, I will give a warning before each spoiler and slap some bright red text on screen so you can mute me until that text goes away, or skip until the designated time. I'll try to keep anything I say vague, even if it is a spoiler, so even if you listen, it won't be too bad. So let's get into the review. The series I am talking about today is the Starlight Shadows Trilogy by Elaine Cunningham, which is set within the Forgotten Realms setting. The story focuses on the Drow Lyriel Bainray and the human Fyodor of Rashemen, as well as the perspectives of some of the villains in the story. Now, this is the first series I've read from Elaine Cunningham, and it is a very good first impression. Now, if you like to avoid spoilers in books and you like reading them in chronological order, you'd have a bit of reading to do before this series. At the very least, the most important thing to do is read the Legend of Drizzt series, finishing the Legacy of the Drow series within it, as Drizzt has close ties to Menzoberranzan, and what occurs in his novels does make changes that we see in Starlight Shadows. They don't mention anything directly, but if you read Starlight Shadows first, it will spoil a few of the Drizzt books, so... Starting with the first novel in the series, Daughter of the Drow, the first few chapters of this novel are such a great introduction for Lyriel, showing her relationship with her father, her emotional distance with her family, and her intelligence as she survives the treacheries and mind games of Menzoberranzan. But it also effectively shows how she doesn't exactly agree with the role she is forced to play in Drow society, even if she isn't completely opposed to their ideals. As for Fyodor, we get to see some of his personality, but I do find he is a bit more of a secondary focus, even during the chapters where he is the focal character. It's not a big difference, more like a 60-40 split in terms of focus, with scenes where he and another main character are on screen. Or on page, I guess. And I'm not complaining. It's certainly more interesting to read the perspective of a non-human learning human nature than just having Fyodor essentially echo the thoughts that we, the humans reading, already have about Drow culture. Speaking of Drow culture, the time the novel spends focusing on life in Menzoberranzan is well spent. The culture and societal roles are briefly explained in an easy-to-digest format for everyone, even readers that are unfamiliar with the Forgotten Realms. Introductions of new characters are detailed but quick. We are given the necessary explanations to understand who they are and their motivations, in the current scene at least, and then we get to see them act in the story. Unlike certain other novels which take numerous paragraphs to detail a side character's lineage, role, and entire personality or lack thereof, only to have them never be used again after that brief scene. One of the biggest highlights for not just the first book in the series, but the entire trilogy are the antagonists. Each with distinct motivations and differing personalities, the series doesn't suffer from repetitive adversaries, especially considering the antagonists have a kind of lover's triangle or pentagon type thing, where the enemy of my enemy is my ally for now, but mostly just another enemy to backstab later. It keeps tensions high and allows the villains to stay interesting. The final battle scene in the novel, which I won't detail to avoid spoilers, isn't my favorite part of the novel, but it's not bad. The pacing is just a little fast where I'd like some more detail, other parts are very well done. It's mostly the spellcasting I find fast, but that's normal for spellcasting duels in novels. They are notably very hard to narrate. The second novel in the series, Tangled Webs, is where I feel the story really picks up. New characters and consequences, lots of new information, and some pretty decent battle scenes. Throughout Tangled Webs, we see a lot of emotional growth from Lyriel, from her new, healthier relationships to coping with old emotions and commitments, as well as learning the differences between the Underdark and the rest of the world. Fyodor also gets much more focus in Tangled Webs, actually showing a bit more character than the first book. He was pretty good in the first book, but didn't get much focus. Now he has some chapters with him where he is not only the focal point, but we see some more development for his character, emotionally, mentally, and sometimes even physically. I actually quite like his storyline in this, and his interactions with side characters, especially antagonists. One of the bigger themes in this novel is how those of the surface interact with Lyriel, and more importantly, how she deals with situations interacting with them. Our protagonist is exposed to cultures she's not familiar with, and oftentimes she either needs to stay to achieve a goal, or otherwise physically can't leave. Though even if she could, Lyriel is very proud and stubborn, and while others cannot understand her and judge her for her actions, she often projects those same judgments and criticisms on other cultures that do things she may not agree with. Elaine Cunningham does a really good job of not making all members of the same culture carbon copies of one another. So there are some characters that are more open-minded to Lyriel and more willing to accept her. Others are very cold and sometimes aggressive, and some very decently written side characters walk that middle line, not understanding her but not rejecting her either, and these characters often provide useful insights for Lyriel to help her better understand where she is and the cultures she is involved in currently. Both Lyriel and Fyodor make great strides towards their own goals in their overarching quests, with some hiccups along the way, some more major than others, and Lyriel eventually has to ask herself some big questions about her morals and her power. The third novel in the series is Windwalker, which came out 7 years after the original release of Tangled Webs. The final book in the trilogy fleshes out more of Fyodor's past, filling in gaps left from the brief glimpses we get in the first two novels. Obviously, being the final novel in the trilogy, this is where loose ends are tied off, and the story converges on one central point. The one thing I like most about this novel is the pacing. I don't find anything rushed in terms of the main story, and it doesn't drag on either. The side characters that get introduced in Windwalker are very interesting. They introduce mysteries and questions that draw the reader in and make these characters very intriguing. Sadly, the pacing is off for one of these mysteries, at least in my opinion, as it progresses very quickly and has a somewhat abrupt and anticlimactic resolution. If it was an actual live campaign, and each chapter was a session, then it may have had better pacing, with there obviously being breaks between sessions for you to sit and think about the what's going on in the session. But as someone who read the entirety of the book over the course of a week, it progressed a little fast for my liking. However, I should mention there are short stories tied to this series that cover some future events with some of these characters. I haven't actually read them yet, so I'll talk about them in whatever anthologies they're included in, but for now, the series ends with a compelling side character that has a lot of loose ends that I would like to learn more about that don't really negatively affect the main story, they just add more to read later, and a really good side character that I feel was sadly a little rushed. Now, the main story is actually pretty good, and I get very interested and invested in the emotional progression of our main characters. All in all, this book was pretty decent. Something I absolutely have to mention before concluding this video is my favorite character, Shakti Hunsren. Antagonist turned villain, Shakti not only has motive from the start, but consistently stays motivated throughout the series either for her own reasons or additional encouragement from other villains working with her. I love her personality and the evolution of her powers and goals. It's not that she's the most evil or dangerous villain, or even the most powerful in general. Her goals are just understandable for her life as a Drow priestess of Menzoberranzan. Just before my conclusion, I have to bring up something. Within the series, Fyodor is described as a, quote, young man, and his face having, quote, broad, chiseled planes, end quote, as well as having straight, dark hair the color of bare tree limbs and winter pale skin. Additionally, he is described as a strong man, stocky and just a bit short of 6 feet, powerfully muscled, young, about a head taller than she being Lyriel, was and much broader. His thick muscles made him resemble a tall dwarf, but his face was beardless and finer of feature. And, quote, the man had dark, fine hair cut carelessly short and skin so pale it almost glowed in the faint light of the cavern, end quote. And looking at the cover arts of both the original and the reprint of Daughter of the Drow, neither art really depicts him as per his description. I'm not judging the books based on this, I'm just pointing it out. One face is beardless and finer of feature, the other has the broad, chiseled planes, but also doesn't look like a character who's supposed to be 19 years old, and also not very fine of feature. And neither one of these depictions has hair that is, quote, cut carelessly short, end quote. But it's fine, it doesn't impact the book, it's just something I noticed, because when I'm reading I'm trying to envision Fyodor, and then the description and the actual visual representation doesn't exactly match. In conclusion, Starlight and Shadows is a solid series. It's a good introduction for those who are unfamiliar with the Forgotten Realms and don't want to be bogged down by random references or name drops that would otherwise not be explained. The story is good, sometimes the pacing changes a bit, but not enough to really take you out of the novels. Most of the characters are likable and somewhat relatable. The villains are entertaining, and overall, Starlight and Shadows is not the best of the best, but is pretty good and still worth a read. And that is all for my review. I hope you enjoyed, and if you want more book reviews like this, then drop a like, drop a comment, and I'll probably just do them anyways because I'm going to read the books anyways, so might as well. But if you enjoyed, please let me know. Bye!